You're probably sitting on the couch, remote in hand, wondering if the next AV receiver you spend a few $100 on will actually make a difference or just end up as another piece of hardware you never really use. I get that. The fear of pouring money into a system that sounds great on paper but falls flat when you finally fire up that big screen movie night is real. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. And today we're going to see whether the Denon AVR X3800H lives up to the hype for everyday folks like us. First off, let's talk about the kind of setup most people have today. You've likely got a 4K or maybe even an 8K TV, a couple of bookshelf speakers, a subwoofer, and perhaps a turntable for vinyl nights. What you want is a single hub that can juggle all those inputs, give you clean, room-filling sound, and stay out of the way when you're just listening to a podcast. The X3800H promises 9.4 channels, Dolby Atmos and DTS-X decoding, and 8K per 60 Hz pass-through, all the buzzwords that make you wonder if you're buying a future-proof beast or an over-engineered toy. If you're the type who watches a lot of streaming movies, plays occasional games, and likes the occasional music binge, this receiver lands in a sweet spot. The 105 watt per channel rating means you can drive moderately sized bookshelf or floor-standing speakers without constantly turning the volume knob to the max. In my own test rig, a pair of Polk Reserve 5.2 towers hit a full, dynamic range at about 70% volume during an action sequence in a recent blockbuster, and the dialogue stayed crisp. That's the kind of real-world performance most people care about. You get enough headroom for explosions without the bass getting muddy. Now, who should walk away? If your listening space is a cramped bedroom or a very tiny apartment, you might not need 9 channels at all. The extra speakers can actually become a hassle when you're trying to fit them into a limited area. Likewise, if you're purely a stereo-only listener who never plans to dive into Atmos, a simpler 2-channel amplifier will save you both space and money. The X3800H's biggest downside shows up when you don't have the room or the speaker count to actually use those extra channels. You end up paying for capability you'll never exploit. One of the practical strengths of the X3800H is its HDMI 2.1 support with 8K per 60 Hz pass-through. I set it up with an 8K LG OLED, and the picture stayed razor-sharp while the audio streamed through the built-in Odyssey Multiple EQ XT32 calibration. The calibration took about 10 minutes, and the system automatically adjusted each speaker based on my room dimensions, which saved me from manually tweaking delay and level settings. For people who aren't audio engineers, that automatic room correction is a massive time saver and prevents the frustration of uneven soundstage that many entry-level receivers suffer from. Another everyday advantage is the integrated HEOS multi-room streaming. I connected my phone via the Denon app and pushed a Spotify playlist to the living room while the TV was off, and the receiver seamlessly switched inputs without dropping the music. The HEOS platform also lets you control volume and source from any room, which is perfect when you're moving between the kitchen and the den. That level of convenience is something you rarely get from a pure video receiver. On the flip side, the X3800H's user interface can feel a bit cluttered once you dig past the basic functions. The on-screen menu scrolls through several layers to get to advanced settings, and while the remote is fairly intuitive for everyday tasks, power users might find the navigation slower than they'd like. I also noticed that the Bluetooth pairing sometimes takes an extra few seconds compared to other brands, which isn't a deal-breaker but adds a tiny friction point when you're trying to jam out quickly. If you're a gamer, the low-latency mode is worth mentioning. I hooked the receiver to a PlayStation 5, enabled the game mode, and the input lag measured roughly 10 milliseconds on a test pattern well within the range that's imperceptible for most people. The receiver also supports eARC, so high-resolution audio from the TV, like Dolby Atmos object-based tracks, passes straight through without needing an additional optical cable. That means you can keep a cleaner setup while still getting immersive sound for both movies and games. Another scenario to consider is vinyl listening. The X3800H includes a phono input with built-in MM/MC preamp, so you can drop a turntable directly into the receiver. I ran a classic jazz record through a pair of Klipsch RP600M speakers, and the warmth of the vinyl came through clearly, with the subwoofer adding just enough depth without overwhelming the mids. For anyone who's been looking for an honest-op solution that handles both modern digital sources and analog playback, that integration is a real convenience. Let's talk value. At its price point, the X3800H competes with other high-end receivers that also offer 9-channel support. What sets it apart is the combination of 8K pass-through, HEOS streaming, and